I like life, summer and winter and every day, whether it's gloomy or gay, November or rainy May. I find I like, yes, I do like life. Oh, well, what do television viewers want to know about one? Likes and dislikes. Yes, I've got plenty of them. Well, now, which do I like best, men or women? I think it rather depends what for.
I think it was just a question of observing, of observation. You know, she looked at everybody the whole time in buses and when she was walking along. And I remember when we were young, when we first met when we were in our teens, we used to go a great deal to matinees. And we used to start off by having baked beans on toast at Lowndes in Coventry Street. And, you know, talking about very serious things. And then suddenly she'd say, shh, shh, shh. I must listen to these people next door, you see. And it used to annoy me rather, because I used to think I was just as interesting as they were. But, no. And so she listened to everybody, everywhere. And that's how she absorbed it all, I think, and produced it all.
I'll tell you what I do rather like, hats. Could I perhaps wear a hat if I come onto your programme? Alas, I do not possess an informal hat. I think perhaps I think my hats, well, they rather tend to be purposeful, and I'd better ask my advisor, I think. My advisor? My grandson, Edward. He's only 11, but he's very wise. And he knows rather more about the world of today than do I. And I may tell you, when I told him you had so kindly invited me onto your programme, he said, "Go ahead, Gaga." With a certain deadly accuracy, he calls me Gaga. He said, "Go ahead, Gaga, live dangerously."
She could see that as long as she concentrated on her work, she had a talent which would grow and give her great joy and everyone else great joy.
Hello. Oh, it's about the dress in the window. I know, it couldn't be more fun, could it? Well, I'd like to try it on, please. Would you? Oh, good. Miss Carpenter? Yes, Mrs. Podger. Miss Carpenter, this lady wants Desire Under the Elms. Such fun, the names, aren't they? Miss Carpenter, will you take Madam into one of the French fitting rooms?
Oh, I couldn't do without my telly. Well, somebody give it me. I think it was the government. Could have been the Red Cross. It was that type of thing. But it's got this bad habit, you know. The pictures go like that. And you have to hit it.
These little blighters never stop writing home. I can't pass 1 in 10 of these.
No, nor can I. Still, you know, I do think it's been heaps of fun working together side by side like this. Hasn't it?
Not my idea of fun, Miss Gossett.
Call me sausage.
Being more of a kind of nature girl, I thought of it as a rose, but of course it was a silver rose, was it?
Yes.
In Rosenkavalier.
Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
By Strauss. You know, Oscar Strauss called his cat Paus. Claude Debussy called his cat Pussy.
I remember first of all meeting her at lunch at their house in Chelsea, where her mother had invited my husband and myself. And here was this little girl. No, I don't think she was so very little. I can't think that Joyce was ever very little. But I suppose she'd have been about 14 or 15. And I remember that she and her mother sang together some lovely South American Negro songs. And I found her mother very American, which is always rather frightening and exciting, I think, don't you?
I have an awful lot of advantages, really, in having a mother from Virginia. You know, she made very, very heavy point about the fact that Virginia was settled by the British. And my father was an Englishman with an American mother from New England, and I think she had a grandfather from Dundee. I'm everything, really. My mother had an enormous talent. She had terrific imagination, and she had a great quality of always making goodness seem attractive. That sounds a very odd thing to say, perhaps, but it's true, and she taught us that. And my father had an enormously strong influence on me, too. He was an architect, and he had this great feeling for form and symmetry and proportion. To have a sense of humor, you've got to have a sense of proportion.
Her humor was universal, which I think humor essentially is. But she was always careful not to place any barriers in her humor. She didn't put in anything that would shut people out.
We come here from Mulgarth Street. Do you know it? We lived there for 30 years or more. Terrible dump, old Mulgarth Street. Most terrible dump I ever saw. Wallpaper peeling off, it was dark and damp, and there was rats. And always that smell of, you know, and gas and cats. I'd rather be there now, I swear I would, than stuck up here in this high, horrible, beautiful, modern flat. Well, nobody never comes in and says, how are you today, dear? Can I borrow a dab of Marge, pay you back payday? I am stuck up here on the 16th floor. Nobody never goes past the door. Haven't heard the ice cream music. No, I haven't seen the dustman for, what, a month or more. We shouldn't have come here, that's for sure. Life down there in Mulgarth Street was rich, all right. We all knew what went on and where. Up here, looking out the window makes you feel so queer. I can't see what goes on from here. Look like a lot of ruddy ants down there. People keep themselves to themselves in flats, and this is a toffee-nosed address. Nobody cares if you're dead or alive, and nobody couldn't care less.
Joyce Grenfell was born into a not very well-to-do family who had many well-to-do relations. Joyce admitted that she greatly benefited from their riches in her early years. Cliveden was the country house of her Aunt Nancy, Lady Astor, the first woman to sit in the House of Commons. Half of Joyce loved the big scale and luxury of Cliveden, and half resented the tension set up by her aunt, who at times could be interfering and argumentative. Lady Astor had great charm and wit. She was a marvelous hostess, and the company at Cliveden was varied. It was not unusual to meet dukes, members of Parliament, international bankers, and men of letters. Joyce often met George Bernard Shaw, and at an impressionable age, listened carefully to his brilliant conversation. The transition from schoolgirl to young woman was abrupt. The coming-out phase of Joyce's life was a brief pause between childhood and marriage.
When I was a girl, there was always time. There was always time to spare. There was always time to sit in the sun, and we were never done with lazing and flirting and doing our embroidery and keeping up our memory books and brushing our hair and writing little notes and going on picnics and dancing, 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 dancing. When I was a girl, there was always time to waste. Thank the Lord.
I got some splendid news for you about my wedding leave. Commandant Borthwaite's giving me 28 days. 28.
28 days? Oh, dear. Oh, I know. Yes, dear, of course. It could be splendid. But you see...
Well, she said you only get spliced once and might as well enjoy it. Huh? Huh? Denny, postpone our wedding after 10 years? You're not serious. You don't mean it. Well, what am I to say to Commandant Borthwaite and the girls?
They bought us a toast rack and everything. You're breaking my heart, that's all. No, you can't explain. All right, then. Tomorrow morning at 11. On the dot.
At 3 o'clock on December the 12th, 1929, at the age of 19, Joyce Phipps married Reggie Grenfell. It was the start of a blissfully happy marriage which was to last the rest of her life. The 30s were not an easy time for anyone. The young Grenfells were uncomfortably short of money. Aunt Nancy came to their rescue and suggested that until such time as they were better off, they should live in one of the cottages on her estate. From here, Joyce became a journalist and then a radio critic for The Observer. She also immersed herself in all aspects of local life, the infant welfare centre, the church and the choir.
I was in the Women's Institute in Buckinghamshire. In fact, I was the president of the Women's Institute in our village. And one day we had a lecture from a lady, and I always feel slightly guilty about this. I've said it in the book that I owe her royalties. And I never paid her because I didn't know her name. But she gave us a lecture on useful and acceptable gifts, or how to make something from nothing.
We had a flat in Chelsea at that time, and I was in bed, having had my first baby, which is a very exciting time for anybody. And Joyce arrived to see me, and equally excited. And she told me that she'd been to this party the night before, where Herbert Fargen had been, and that they'd asked her to do her monologue about useful and acceptable gifts. And she'd done it, and it had gone very well, and that Fargen had asked her to be in his new review. And she was bubbling with excitement. And had she been a champagne drinker, we would have certainly drunk champagne. But she was bubbling without the champagne. And that was the start of her enormously great career.
On April the 21st, James Agate wrote in the Sunday Times, "In the matter of preferences, my own choice would be the two contributions written, devised, and acted by Miss Joyce Grenfell. I have the greatest possible admiration for the producer, Mr. Fargen, for allowing Miss Grenfell within 1,000 miles of this theatre."
The fun of 100 fairs and how much more. A king's ransom couldn't pay all the salaries of all the stars. How do you do, Mr. Noel Coward? How do you do?
1939 was a thrilling year for Joyce. The year of her first review, and the year she first visited the theatrical garden party as a professional. On the 4th of September, in a letter to her mother in America, she wrote, "So it's war. So far it doesn't look or feel like one, but I dare say by the time this reaches you, we'll have had a taste. Everyone goes about with gas masks tied by strings over one shoulder. Sugar is unobtainable in Maidenhead, but that is only because its transport was delayed while evacuation of children, pregnant mothers, and the blind took place."
Hey, what's going on in here?
We were only looking at the lights, Mrs. Rogers.
Aren't you tired of them yet?
Will you please read Mummy's letter, Mrs. Rogers?
Where have you put it?
Please read it again.
Come and sit here while I read.
Joyce and I began our film career together in a propaganda short directed by Carol Reed and made to show the Americans how we coped with the bombing, the rationing, and other wartime hardships. I played the part of a young mother whose children had been evacuated to the United States, and Joyce was the American foster mother who read my letters to them. They were full of stories about Britain at war and their father's life in the Navy.
Daddy's ship is still at sea. I hope you're both well and being very good to Mrs. Rogers. Ethel sends her love and a big hug each. Good night, my darlings. All my love.
In 1943, Joyce joined ENSA. She reported to their headquarters at the Theatre Royal, Drury Lane, for costume fittings, inoculations, and briefings. From there, she began a tour of military hospitals in 15 different countries. At 35, she could be mom, auntie, the wife, or the girlfriend. It was an experience which stretched her in a way nothing else could possibly have done. It was to teach her everything she knew about timing, entertaining, and audiences. At first, the going was rough. Gradually, she learned how to cope with the challenge of unresponsive listeners.
I learned a lesson in humility, because when I'd left England, I was going to be very polished and jolly, and all my songs were gay and rhythmic and that sort of thing. But I just hadn't quite imagined what the situations were. They didn't want to be cheered up exactly. They liked to laugh, of course. But what really did everybody good was to sing very slow songs loudly together.
I'm feeling fine, but I wish you were here. I need you still, I always will, my dear. There is nothing new to tell you. We've said it all before, but I thought I'd like to say it once more. You are all I adore.
Well, a tap on that gong should bring them from their burrows. Yes, Miss Richards. A tap, Gossage. I said a tap. You're not introducing a film.
Soon after the war, Joyce went back into films, playing a series of small but inimitable parts, which were to win her a far wider audience than a lifetime of working in theatres and concert halls. Perhaps the most memorable of all the roles she played was the enthusiastic, vulnerable hockey mistress. The plummiest part of all came in Happiest Days of Your Life. Miss Gossage was the queen of all the galumphers. Joyce, with her gawky schoolgirl days in mind, gave Miss Gossage the same endearing awkwardness.
You're in the habit of writing your name all over the place, Gossage?
No, Miss Richard.
Then kindly stop doing it at once.
You know, it's a funny thing. Surely this goal's smaller than that one.
Only 2 feet. It's our goal.
But I don't understand. How do you know it's our goal? We haven't won the toss yet.
We always win the toss.
How?
Hold this.
2 heads? That's cheating.
Knock it.
No, I refuse to knock it. And anyway, what's the advantage you've got to change over for the second half?
Never is a second half.
Oh, give it to me. Gracious me, I thought hockey was a game, but with you girls, it's more like jungle warfare. Lucretia, hold this thing taut at the back. The sad thing is, I was never any good at games or anything like that, but I kind of knew what it must feel like to be good at games. In fact, I was a sort of dreamer about that kind of thing.
Heads.
I wanted terribly to be good. And I was so bad you wouldn't believe. To start with, I was the wrong shape. I was fat and round and heavy, and I had the biggest feet in the school, which at one moment I thought was perhaps rather a mark of distinction. Hello, Miss Davidson. How frightfully nice to see you. Yes, that's right. Lumpy Latimer. Do you know, I'd entirely forgotten about that. Only Patsy Marsh is here, and she reminded me. Well, my name is now Clinch. As in boxing. I always say that. I married a man called Keith Clinch, and we've been living out in Kenya. You have to call it Kenya now. And we're more or less settled here now. The children have come and that, yes. Yes, I think we are going to miss the sun, quite frightfully. I'm going to buy myself a woolly vest. Are you by way of going into the tea? Yes, I am. Oh, well, Patsy's going to be there. Let's all foregather. We can have a natter. Yes, it is actually my first old girls' reunion for far too long a time. Far too many moons. Yes, well, I'll see you in a minute. Yes. I say, aren't you Wendy Plackett? Yes, I thought you were. I don't suppose you remember me. Yes, that's right, Lumpy Latimer. Do you know, I had forgotten, isn't it ghastly? Well, my name is now Clinch. I married a man called Keith Clinch, and we've been living out in... No, not in the Argentine, actually. In Kenya. And you have to call it Kenya now. And we're more or less settled here. Wendy, what's your name now? Still Plackett? Still Plackett. Yes, well... No, it's a lovely name. It's an absolutely lovely name. Oh, look, there's Mamselle. Isn't she tiny? I must go and have a word with her. Are you going into the tea? Well, let's go together, shall we? Well, just a minute, I must go and speak to Mamselle. Hello, Mamselle. C'est très gentil de vous voir. Oui, c'est ça, l'empilèrement. Enfin, maintenant, je suis appelée Madame Clinch. Oui, ici, en Angleterre. Non, pas beaucoup de soleil. Non, c'est très gentil de vous voir. Au revoir, Mamselle. Oh, isn't she nice? I wonder why we hated her. Hello, Missy Wiggins!
She never thought of herself really as an actress. She always said she was an entertainer. As a matter of fact, she was an extremely good actress and a very, very funny one. And particularly, I think, good in films.
I'm afraid it is a little uncomfortable. It's rather noisy.
Noisy?
The lady who had it last, one of our permanent residents, was totally deaf. So in her case, it didn't really matter. Unfortunately, only last week, we lost her. You see, it's really very...
Well, I'm sure it will do very well.
Well, it's very close.
Oh, that's all right. Which floor, please?
It's number 57 on the 5th. Mr. and Mrs. McKim.
Yes, that's right. Is there a lift?
Oh, no, I'm afraid we have no lift.
Is there someone who can give me a hand with these?
I'm so sorry. The hall porter's just having his supper, but you can leave them there if you like.
I think I can manage.
Is the bathroom in our room, please?
No, both the bathrooms are on the second floor landing.
The second?
Yes, you'll see them on your way up. And when you want to take a bath, would you be so kind as to sign the little book you'll find just inside the bathroom door?
Sign right now.
Oh, I'm so sorry, but hot water is provided only in the afternoons between 2:30 and 6.
There's no hot water?
Yes, hot water is provided in the afternoons between 2:30 and 6.
Darling, I think we'd better go up.
But this is preposterous.
I'm very sorry, but I did not make the rules.
But then who did? Oh, never mind. I don't want to know.
No one's ever complained before.
Joyce's mother complained about the unglamorous lady she continually portrayed. And only after she saw her play opposite Gregory Peck in A £1 Million Note did she urge her friends to watch her daughter's films. Joyce played the part of an Edwardian duchess, an aristocratic image she so often conveyed in real life.
I was a member of the journalist club at Sydney University, and we asked her to come to lunch. We were fairly confident that she wouldn't come because, you know, she's a very busy, very famous woman. And judge our consternation when she said yes. That meant we had to climb into our suit and rehearse our table manners. And I'd never seen anything like her. She staggered the perfect combination of poise and vitality. It was just breath-bereaving. And we sat right through lunch. I think the moment that really staggered us was when we got to the dessert. It was some sort of pear was served up, and none of us really knew how to eat it. You know, we were all very young and very callow, boys from the bush, right? And we were looking at this pear and thought, well, we'll see what she does with it, and then we'll do the same. And she picked up a spoon. She wasn't even looking at the pear, but, you know, her finishing school manners were so automatic. They were classic, in fact. She picked up a spoon and sort of put it on top of the pear, and it started to spin, and it sank down into the pear. And the contents were removed with such neatness that the skin of the pear just collapsed gently inwards with a sigh. We all had an open mouth and thought, this is class.
My favourite character that I ever wrote was one of the last I ever wrote, and she was the wife of a vice-chancellor of an Oxbridge university. I didn't know we had an underground newspaper in this university. And it's called Psst. Oh, isn't that exciting? Has it been going on for long? 2 weeks. Oh, triumphant. I discovered her when I was cleaning my teeth. And I suddenly thought, I wonder what sort of voice comes out of a mouse. And And I went into the living room where my husband was still up reading, and I said, I think I've got my new character. She's going to be very intellectual, and I can't wait to write her. And I started to talk to him about her, and I loved her because she's the kind of person I really admire. She's very well read, she's literate, she's articulate, and she assumes you know as much as she does. I suppose you feel that it's very important that your paper should continue. It has some mission to help us all on our way. How do you see that happening? Total anarchy. You're awfully total, aren't you? Mark you, and I think anarchy in the abstract has a certain drawing power. And then I stop and I think, yes, but who is going to be responsible for the drains? Well, I think you should think about that, Mervyn. Plumbing is central to the better life. And people who want to get rid of everything never quite see it through, I don't think.
She was the real revolutionary. Because charitable activities, which is another subject, a vast subject, the other half of her life, were profound. They weren't something incidental to her, they were fundamental to her. And they were far beyond any glib talk about society's benefits being shared. I mean, Joyce was out there doing the sharing all the time. It's just you never knew.
Joyce was exceedingly generous and loving towards other people's children, although she had none of her own. It was on the stage that Joyce felt happiest, and she was proud of the fact that she wrote most of her own material. She was amongst the best of that rare breed who can hold an audience on their own. Review work was demanding, the discipline harsh, the pre-London tours were often discouraging with long rehearsals, last-minute changes and gloomy theatres.
Each time we went away, well, the first time, which of course was tuppence coloured, was in 1947. It was a very, very hot summer. And we opened in Cheltenham. And we were all excited, naturally. And nothing was going right. We were there for 2 or 3 days before the opening there. And nothing was going right, and the costumes weren't ready, and it was really a mess. The gloom and the absolute black despair from the people around us, you see. And Joyce always had this joy, and joyful Joyce, and hope. She was a wonderful person for her, and it rubbed off her onto you.
She was always the same, or if I went into the theatre before a show, which we would have our little warm-up, and I knew that I was not going to be met with anything but the happiest of moods. She was always happy and outgoing when I came into the theatre. By always taking an optimistic view, she found it worked, I would think, and it wasn't that she didn't have problems, you know.
In 1947, at the Fortune Theatre, she took her first lead in Joyce Grenfell Requests a Pleasure. She received 69 telegrams and messages from Noel Coward, Sir John Gielgud, and Gladys Cooper. It was the most important night in her stage career. For the first time, she tried out a sad song about an unmarried lady who sacrifices a life of her own to take care of her 3 younger brothers.
All of my brothers, Harry and Jim and Bob, grew to be good and clever, each of them at his job. And I was allowed to wait on them to be their slave complete. I was allowed to work for them, and life for me was sweet. For I was allowed to fetch and carry for my 3 brothers, Jim and Bob and Harry. Jim went out to South Africa, Bob went out to Ceylon, Harry went out to New Zealand and settled in Wellington. And the grass grew high on the cricket pitch, and the tennis court went to hay, and the place was too big and too silent after they went away. So I turned it into a guest house after our parents died. I wrote to the boys every Sunday, and once a year they replied. All of them married eventually. I wrote to their wives, of course, Their wives wrote back on postcards. Well, it might have been very much worse. And now I have 9 nieces, most of them home at school. I have them all to stay here for the holidays as a rule. And I am allowed to wait on them to do odd jobs galore. I am allowed to work for them, and life is sweet once more. For I am allowed to fetch and carry for the children of Jim and Bob and Harry.
Once on a northern concert tour, in search of a place to stay, Joyce came across a view in the Lake District which filled her with unexplained excitement. It was a valley which held such magic for her that she returned to it again and again for more than 20 years. She often referred to it as her spiritual home and told only the closest of her friends where the valley was.
Ah, she said, there's only one place to go. And she said, you're a very privileged person. I'm going to tell you where to go. And she did. And she said, we'll join you there. And she told me how they discovered this little hotel. And it had some marvelous views. And this was enormous fun. I made a drawing through the window for her. And she made a drawing of me. You know, she drew rather well. She had in her early days trained, and throughout her life she made drawings and did watercolors.
Funny looking in an oilskin fishing hat, I know a simple bliss on this wet day. I am watching a pied flycatcher feed its invisible young above my head in a small dark hole high in an oak tree. I am in a steep grove of mountain oaks where the sloping ground is carpeted close in deeply springing cross-stitch patterned moss. Bliss is a strong word, wiping out all else. I know a simple bliss, watching all this and a bird in a tree.
Poetry, I think, was rather a sort of a subsidiary. I mean, I think she was quite surprised that she could write a poem, but she wrote some very nice ones.
But there was absolutely nothing she couldn't do. She could write, she could embroider, she could sing, she had critical faculties, she could entertain, she could act. She was very musical. I didn't think this was fair. It was perfectly absurd. Somebody should have all those talents.
Children, now free time is over, so put away your things and finish up. Hurry up, because we've got a visitor, and we want to be able to tell our story together. You're going to make a lovely half circle on the floor, aren't you? And then we'll tell our story together. Are you going to be all right there, Mrs. Binton? I think you'll get quite a good view. That's right. Now hurry up, everybody. Sydney, come out from under the table, will you, and come and help me tell our nice story.
When I came to illustrate her monologues, I went down to the local nursery school, and the 2 teachers who ran this school were entranced at the idea of doing this, illustrating this book for Joyce. And they built me a barricade, put desks all round me, and my ink was securely fixed so the children couldn't kick it over. And in this fortress, I drew while the tides of children screamed and howled round me. It was marvelous because it was a clear case of nature imitating art. If I'd had a recording machine, it sounded so exactly like Joyce Grenfell.
Neville, stop being a train, dear, and come and sit down. Well, get into the station and then sit down. George, George, don't do that. Tim, what have you got in your hand? But we haven't had toast and jelly for 2 days. Where did you find it, Tim? In your pocket? No, I don't think you better eat it. Well, look, it's covered in little fuzzy bits. No, dear, you go and throw it away and put it in the waste paper basket, and then you have a nice wash. Now then, everybody listen carefully. Once upon a time, there was a dear little bunny rabbit, and he lived... Where did he live? No, not in a flat. Not in a tree. And not in a television set. Now think. Yes, Hazel, he did. He lived in a hole. Only some of us like to call it a burrow, don't we? And he lived in the burrow. Who did he live there with, Caroline? With his mummy bunny rabbit. Good. And who else? His daddy bunny rabbit. Right. And who else? All his little brother and sister bunny rabbits. Wasn't that nice? Yes, it was, Sydney.
When I was very young, I was a great admirer of Joyce Grenfell, and her song, the song that she wrote herself with Richard Addinsall, the composer, I'm Going to See You Today, was a song that I often tried to imitate. I even tried to do it for her once, but gave up hopelessly. I'm not very good at imitating, and I never really gotten anywhere near her. But it was such a delightful song, and that was really what introduced me to Joyce.
I'm going to see you today. All's well with my world, and the people that I meet as I hurry down the street seem to know I'm on my way.
It moves me when I hear someone singing tune, and Joyce moved me for that reason. It had a pure quality, but it's very difficult to assess it. It was a good, to my mind, good natural singing voice.
This is our red letter day. It's come at last, you see. Couldn't really be a better day. It's meant for you and me. This day we've been awaiting patiently.
I would say that Joyce was one of those rather rare people born with a marvelous ear for music. And she had a sense of pitch, which was quite remarkable. I'll give you a little example. I remember one day I came into the studio and I played this note. And I said to Joyce, now that's the beginning of the piece, sing the next notes. And Joyce went straight away. The girl with the flaxen hair, she had managed, by judging the pitch of that note, she had managed to get what the piece was. There are very few musicians in the world that could do that. Now that I call having a fantastic ear. And Joyce was born with that, and in her head were hundreds of tunes, absolutely perfectly contained. There was only one tiny snag. She often couldn't remember the names of them.
Is it by the Beatles? One of the
Yes.
Beatles? Yes.
We don't know the name.
Lovely, but I've no idea of the name.
No, I haven't heard.
She was unconsciously a star. She had this star quality about her. But I think that her chief contribution to the program was her lovely sense of humor, which never ever deserted her, and a little quirkiness too, because you never quite knew whether Joyce was really being an idiot or knew the answer perfectly well and was playing the idiot. And I never discovered, I never knew.
Elephants. Do you remember in Fantasia?
Oh, yes, I remember Fantasia.
The dance of
yes.
the hours.
Yes.
Yes.
You're quite right about the Fantasia, yes.
Yes, elephants.
It wasn't the answer I was expecting, actually.
No, but am I right?
What about?
That it was the dance of the
absolutely.
Of the hours.
Yes, yes.
Who's
Oh.
it by? Is it Delhi?
What?
No, who's it by? I don't know.
It's by Ponchielli. But what
Is
were
it?
you looking at, Joyce?
I was looking at some clocks.
Yes.
Well, that meant hours, didn't it?
Yes, that's right.
Not done.
You haven't given us the name of the actual piece.
The dance of the hours.
Oh, did you say dance the hours? I thought you
Three
said
times.
elephant 3 times.
She was anti-smoking and anti-drinking, and if she thought anybody was drinking too much, she said, you know, that's going to ruin your supper. But she always said it with a sort of George, don't do that kind of attitude.
Joyce was bossy, and she owned up. She said, I am bossy, and everybody knows it, and poor Reggie has had to live with it all this time, in my bossiness. But if you loved Joyce, you just accepted it, and that was that.
I never saw one flicker of doubt in her face. I never heard it in her conversation. I can't remember Joyce ever saying, oh, I think I might do so-and-so. Or I often wonder if. No, never. That doesn't sound like Joyce to me.
One felt absolutely safe with her. She was always the same from the very start of our friendship to the end. She never varied. She was absolutely loyal. And it's that same thing with all friendships, I think, that thing of sharing and of not having to edit anything, which was so marvelous. And, you know, she rang me up every morning at 8:20 precisely. And we just used to, although we didn't see each other a great deal, really, we used to converse always at that time in the morning. And she wrote a great many letters when she was away. So we always knew what the other was doing, which was lovely.
The thing that fascinates me about Joyce was that I think she was entirely human. It's just that she was purely human, without a lot of the drawbacks that most human beings have. And I think that's what makes her remarkable. She always gave you the sense of just how inspiring a human being could be.
Yes, it is my first flight. Well, I tell a lie, really, because once I went to Jersey, but I didn't like it. I came back on the boat. But this is my first proper flight with food.
Joyce had a sureness, rooted in deep religious faith. She was a Christian Scientist, wonderfully secure in her beliefs. In the last monologue she ever wrote, she fulfilled a long ambition to tell a story about somebody who was essentially good, an anxious, warm-hearted grandmother on a first flight to visit her family in America.
Well, they live at a place called, I think it's called Stamford, Connecticut. Oh, is that how you pronounce it? Well, I shan't have to mention it when I'm there. They're going to meet me in New York, yes. Yes, he has married an American girl. She's an Afro-American girl, a black girl. I do hope I'm going to do it all right. You know, I'd like to be absolutely natural, you know, to make it easy for her and that.
I think, really, her own beliefs came through in all her monologues. I think she really did live her beliefs.
I don't know whether I think it's easier for a mixed marriage in Britain or in America. There must be more of them in America, mustn't there? But I'd like to have them living near me, you know, running in and out and that. And then I wonder, because where I live, people are very narrow. They lead very little lives, you know. None of them use their front rooms. Oh, they've all got them, you know, but they don't use them. They've got matching net curtains all the way up, but they don't use their front rooms. A woman in my church said to me the other day, she said, it's no good you going on about us all being the same. I mean, I look in the mirror, I'm pink, they look in the mirror, they're brown. I mean, we're different, we're meant to be different, she said. And I thought to myself, well, I'm quite glad I'm different from you. Well, she's got some very funny false teeth. I shouldn't have said that. No, well, it wasn't kind, but, you know, she gets on my wick. I said, look, I mean, people are going to be different to people always. You have to realise that. But in the sight of God, I'm absolutely certain we're all exact. I hope you didn't mind my saying that. Well, people don't like you to mention things like that, do they? They get embarrassed and start counting their buttons.
She would talk about religion. She'd talk about what soup one was having for lunch. Nothing crept into her voice. You know, there are people who, when they talk about religion, you somehow see them changing their clothes in front of your eyes. But with Joyce, it all came to and fro.
I wonder, do you think there's perhaps a place where they could be watching the aeroplane come in? Don't they have the kind of, I don't know, observation terraces or that? Well, the plane is turning. There's a building coming in now. I think there are some people up there on a kind of terrace place. Yes, there are. They're there. They're all there. Oh, I do hope I do it all right. I just want to do it all right.
I think she thought that good in any form was evidence of God's presence. And so she looked for good in everybody and everything. And, of course, she found it because she was looking for it. And I think what stopped her being too good was that she had this terrific sense of humor. And she really thought people were very funny.
Such peaceful thoughts my mind doth fill, serene my heart today, and sweet and calm, and doubt is fled away. Unclouded is the view I see, and undisturbed. I just remembered something absolutely ghastly. I forgot to go into the kitchen before we came to church to turn the gas off underneath the chicken bones I am turning into soup. I know exactly what's going to happen. All the water will boil away, and the bottom of the saucepan will get red hot and fall on the floor of the kitchen. And very slowly the linoleum will burn through and set fire to the house. And my fur coat isn't insured. And where are we going to sleep tonight? No troubled thoughts harmonious is the way. I suppose if I were to make a dash for it, I might be able to rescue the drawing that is supposed to be by Picasso. But I would far rather have my old photograph books and my cozy bedroom slippers.
She had this extraordinary ability, which is very rare, I think, of all her monologues, of being funny without being malicious, which is very difficult to do.
I thought again and again, it must fade. That these things, the monologues are dated. The whole class structure of the setup is now old-fashioned. It must go. But it never did. And she once told me why her work retained this freshness. She said, I always listened. I kept listening. And she said, language moves the whole time, imperceptibly. And she said, I realized that if I was to keep my performances fresh, I must listen the whole time.
Joyce never called herself an actress, but there were certain theatres which gave her a sense of being part of theatrical tradition. Her last performance was not in a theatre, but before the Queen at Windsor Castle in the spring of 1973. The programme included perhaps her funniest monologue, The Terrible Warrior.
The other evening, I was sitting around in here, and some young people come by with tickets for a raffle. And I took 2. And no sooner did I have them in my hand than I realised I had done a wrong thing. Oh, no, that's not the wrong thing. Oh, I've done 2. Well, come to think of it, a raffle is gambling, isn't it? I don't like the idea of gambling, but the prizes, oh, they was lovely. The first prize is a cruise for two to Madeira. There and back. And the second prize was a cocktail cabinet with all beautiful crystal goblets. Then they got these littler prizes like a brace of pheasants and a rabbit and boxes of this and that, and only 5 new p for the tickets. I told Mrs. Inkstone when she come back to our cottage next door that I'd got the tickets, and she said, mind you win that cruise for 2, I'll go with you. We had a good laugh, didn't we? And then I started to worry because I might win. Well, they could make you go, couldn't they?
There was this wonderful gift of writing in a compressed way. I mean, her sketches are really like little plays. There's a lot in them.
The lady come on to do the draw, and she makes a big palaver of it, you know, muddles all the tickety bits like they've got in the container, and then she makes her selection and takes all day about it and says, I thought to myself, get on with it, you know, first prize, a cruise for 2 to Madeira. And then she undone the ticket, forever undoing it. And she says, first prize, Lady Clutton Taylor. Lady Clutton Taylor? You would not credit it, would you? Well, I mean, she can afford to go on a cruise any day of the week. Nobody much clapped. And I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. You know, I was disappointed and relieved at one and the same time. And I was just bending down to pick myself up to go off home when I heard my name called. Mrs. Moss, 2 Alma Cottages, Bull Lane, a lovely rabbit. I look over and there's this woman standing on the platform with a rabbit in her hand. Dead. But still in its fur. So I think to myself, well, I'm not going to be bothered with that. So I'm not going to let on I'm there, you see. I'll just sit there, numb. That Mrs. Abercrombie, bravo, Mrs. Moss, you've won a lovely rabbit.
She would have been fascinating for her powers of mimicry alone. I mean, they were in the Peter Sellers class. She was a really great mimic.
Well, I'm on the bus now, and I'm worrying. How am I going to get rid of this said rabbit? I couldn't leave it on the bus. Well, you know, some nosy Parker would come running after you. Oh, you've left your rabbit on the bus. And I couldn't just drop it into the gutter. It was raining. And I couldn't put it in my dustbin because they cleared it that morning. And you know how they are now, just once a week. I mean, if that, because they please themselves. And you cannot put a rabbit in a bin if the bin's near the house and the rabbit is still in its fur and the period is for any length of time and the weather's mild. Well, I'm off the bus now and I'm walking up Queen's Hill. And I pause to get my breath, and I find I am standing alongside a little red car, parked like, you know, and it's got its window open a bit like that. And before I knew what I'd done, I posted that rabbit.
She had this great urge to communicate and to be communicated with, I think. I think that was really it. She was very interested in people. She had a lot to say about everything and somehow wanted to express it.
At the age of 63, Joyce lost the sight of her left eye. Not wishing the public to know, she quietly retired from the stage and returned to her first love, writing. It was time to start her memoirs. Her playing years had been an exciting and rewarding time. She had a rich treasure of things to look back upon. It was time for a change of pace, time for reflection.
But now I'm an old woman, so I want the last word. There is no such thing as time, only the
On November the 30th, 1979, less than a month before her golden wedding anniversary, Joyce Grenfell died at the age of 69.
When she walks into the room, it's full of light and joy and happiness. She brings a sort of aura with her of loveliness.
She was always looking forward, always looking for something nice around the corner, if the present wasn't very nice.
She was always a very positive lady about anything that she did and how she went about it. I think probably that's why she cheered people up.
And always had this warm welcome. There she was, bang on the doorstep. She didn't step back, she stepped forward to meet you. And we always embraced. And it was always wonderful.
There was no malice in her, there was no gossip in her, there was no spite or maliciousness or anything. But my goodness, she wasn't boring.
She was the personification of love and happiness and truth.
If I should go before the rest of you, break not a flower, nor inscribe a stone, nor when I'm gone speak in a Sunday voice, but be the usual selves that I have known. Weep if you must. Parting is hell, but life goes on, so sing as well.
I like life, summer and winter and every day, whether it's gloomy or gay, November or rainy May. I find I like life.